Mesopotamia, 2348 before Christ. Part 1. The Call of the Divine. Asael lived in a time of unparalleled beauty in the ancient land of Mesopotamia, a region blessed with fertile soil and abundant water, where life seemed to flourish effortlessly. The village he called home was a peaceful haven, nestled between two great rivers that nourished the land and provided for the people. The days were long and filled with the sounds of the earth. A gentle breeze rustling through the reeds by the riverbank, the distant call of birds, and the soft murmur of the waters as they wound their way through the fields. But beneath this serene surface, Asael sensed a growing darkness. The world around him was changing, and not for the better. The people who once lived in harmony with the earth and with each other had begun to lose their way. Idols of stone and wood, carved by human hands, had taken the place of the one true God in the hearts of many. Violence and corruption spread like a plague, turning neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. Greed, lust, and cruelty were no longer condemned but celebrated. The world had become a place of shadow, where the light of righteousness was growing dim. Asael was different. From his earliest memories, he had been taught to walk in the ways of God. His parents were devout, simple people who feared the Lord and lived by his commandments. They had raised Asael to love God above all things and to see his hand in every aspect of life, from the bounty of the harvest to the beauty of a sunset. Asael absorbed these teachings deeply, and they shaped him into a man of unwavering faith and integrity. Even as a child, Asael was known in the village for his wisdom beyond his years. He was quiet and reflective, often found alone by the river, lost in thought or prayer. The other children might have teased him for his solemn nature, but they also respected him, drawn to the calm strength that seemed to radiate from within. As he grew older, this strength only deepened, and Asael became a beacon of righteousness in a world that was increasingly losing its way. But being a beacon of light in a darkening world was not easy. As Asael grew into manhood, the contrast between his life and the lives of those around him became more pronounced. While others reveled in their newfound freedoms, free to indulge in whatever desires or impulses they wished, Asael remained committed to the path of righteousness. He refused to participate in the debauchery that had become so common, nor would he turn a blind eye to the injustices that were happening around him. This made Asael an outsider in his own village. The elders, who once respected him, began to view him with suspicion, as someone who was out of step with the times. The younger men, who once sought his counsel, now mocked him for his steadfastness, calling him old-fashioned and out of touch. Even his own family, though they loved him, found it difficult to understand why he couldn't just adapt, why he insisted on living by a code that seemed so out of place in this new world. But Asael did not waver. He knew that the world around him was sinking into sin, but he also knew that his place was to stand firm, to be a witness to the righteousness of God, even in the midst of darkness. He spent his days working in the fields, caring for his crops and animals, and his nights in prayer, seeking guidance and strength from the Lord. His prayers became more urgent as the days passed, his heart heavy with the burden of seeing so much evil around him. He prayed for his people, for their hearts to turn back to God, and for the Lord's intervention to cleanse the earth of its wickedness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Asael felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. He left his home and walked to the river, where he often went to pray. The water flowed quietly, reflecting the darkening sky, and the air was cool and still. Asael knelt by the riverbank, his hands clasped in front of him, and he poured out his heart to God. "Lord," Asael prayed, his voice trembling with emotion, "I cannot bear to see the world like this any longer. The people have turned away from you, and their hearts are full of evil. How long will you allow this to continue? How long before you bring justice to the earth? I beg you, Lord, have mercy on your creation. Show them the way back to you, and cleanse the world of this wickedness." As Asael prayed, tears filled his eyes and streamed down his face. His heart ached with a deep, almost unbearable sorrow for the world and its people. He felt utterly alone, a single soul crying out for righteousness in a world that seemed to have forgotten what that even meant. And then, in the stillness of the night, Asael heard a voice. It was not the voice of the wind or the river, but something far deeper, resonating within his very soul. The voice was clear and powerful, yet gentle, and it spoke with an authority that Asael knew could only come from one source. "Asael," the voice said, filling his heart with a warmth that banished the cold of the night. "Your prayers have been heard. Your faith has not gone unnoticed. The time of judgment is near, but you, Asael, have found favor in my sight. Now, I call you to a journey. Rise, leave your home, and go to the place I will show you. Do not fear, for I will be with you." Asael's breath caught in his throat. He knew instantly that this was the voice of the Almighty. A mixture of awe and fear surged through him. But above all, he felt a deep peace, as if the hand of God was resting upon him, guiding him. He remained kneeling for a moment longer, his heart pounding, before he finally whispered, "Yes, Lord, I will do as you command." The next morning, before the first light of dawn, Asael prepared to leave. He packed only what he could carry: a few clothes, some dried food, and a flask of water. He didn't know where he was going, how long he would be gone, or what awaited him, but he knew that God had called him, and that was all the assurance he needed. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that he might never return, that he was leaving behind everything he had ever known, but he trusted in God's plan. Asael stepped out of his home and into the cool morning air. The village was still quiet, the people still asleep, unaware of the journey that was about to begin. Asael took one last look at the place he had called home for so many years. The fields he had tended, the river that had been his refuge, the simple house that had sheltered him. They all seemed so small now, so insignificant in the face of what he was being called to do. He turned away from the village, his eyes set on the road ahead, and began to walk. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the landscape. And as Asael walked, he felt a sense of purpose and resolve settle over him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew that God was with him, guiding his steps. The journey was long and filled with challenges. Asael traveled through forests and over mountains, across rivers and through valleys. The land was vast and varied, each new landscape more awe-inspiring than the last. He encountered wild animals and treacherous terrain, but Asael pressed on, trusting in God's protection. He slept under the stars, his only companions the sounds of the night and the presence of God, which he felt with every breath. As the days turned into weeks, Asael's faith only grew stronger. Each step he took was an act of obedience, each night of rest a chance to renew his trust in God. He had no map, no clear destination, but he knew that when the time was right, God would show him where he was meant to be. Finally, after many weeks of travel, Asael noticed a change in the air. The landscape around him became more rugged, the trees taller and denser. The sounds of nature grew louder, as if the earth itself was alive with the presence of God. Asael felt a stirring in his spirit, a sense that he was drawing closer to his destination. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Asael came upon a clearing at the foot of a mountain. In the distance, he saw a man working tirelessly, shaping massive beams of wood with a skill and precision that spoke of years of experience. The man was strong, his muscles rippling with every swing of his hammer, and the structure he was building was unlike anything Asael had ever seen. Asael's breath caught in his throat as he watched the man work. The scene was almost surreal, the man's focus so intense, his purpose so clear. There was something extraordinary about this place, something holy. Asael could feel the presence of God more strongly than ever before, and he knew that this was where he was meant to stop. The voice of God spoke to him once again, this time with a calm authority that filled him with peace. "This is the place, Asael. Set up your camp nearby and watch. Do not interfere, for the task of building this structure is not yours. Simply observe and remain faithful." With that, Asael set up his camp a short distance from the man and his mysterious project. He found a small clearing sheltered by trees, where he pitched his tent and made a fire. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and Asael felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He knew that he was exactly where God wanted him to be. For the next few days, Asael watched as the man continued his work. The structure slowly took shape, revealing itself to be a massive vessel, an ark unlike any ship Asael had ever seen. Its size was immense, its design intricate, and Asael realized with awe that this was not just any ship. This was a vessel of salvation, a refuge from the coming judgment. The realization filled him with a sense of reverence and fear, for he understood that the world as he knew it was about to change forever. Yet despite his growing understanding of the ark's purpose, Asael remained obedient to God's command. He did not approach the man who was building the ark, nor did he offer to help, though his hands itched to do so. He knew that the task of building the ark had been given to this man, whose name he learned was Noah, and that his own role was simply to observe and remain faithful. As the days turned into weeks, Asael's routine became one of quiet contemplation and prayer. He spent his days in solitude, watching the ark grow and marveling at the skill and determination with which Noah worked. He would often rise early in the morning, while the world was still shrouded in darkness, to pray and give thanks to God for guiding him to this place. His prayers were filled with gratitude and awe, for Asael knew that he was witnessing a divine plan unfold before his eyes. The landscape around him became more familiar, the rhythms of nature a constant companion in his solitude. The sun rose and set, the seasons changed, and the ark grew larger and more imposing with each passing day. Asael marveled at the sheer scale of the project, at the meticulous care with which each piece of wood was fitted into place. He knew that this was no ordinary ship, but a vessel of divine purpose, designed to withstand the coming storm and carry its precious cargo to safety. One morning, as Asael was deep in prayer, he noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that sent a shiver down his spine. The sky, which had been clear moments before, was now overcast, the clouds thickening as if in anticipation of something monumental. Asael felt a sense of urgency, a whisper in his heart telling him that the time was drawing near. He knew that the world was on the brink of a great transformation, one that would sweep away the old and bring forth something new. Asael continued to watch and pray, his heart filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. He didn't know exactly what was to come, but he knew that he was a part of something far greater than himself, something ordained by the very hand of God. He prayed for strength, for wisdom, and for the faith to see this journey through to the end, whatever that might be. The days grew darker, the air thicker, and Asael knew in his soul that the time was near. He watched as Noah continued to work tirelessly, even as the first drops of rain began to fall. Asael's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and reverence. The voice of God had spoken, and Asael had listened. Now, he would witness the fulfillment of that divine promise. Part 2. The Gathering of the Animals. The ark stood completed, its immense structure a testament to divine instruction and human obedience. The valley, which had once been a tranquil, secluded place, now seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the very ground beneath Asael's feet was aware of the monumental events about to unfold. The sky above was an unsettling gray, with clouds hanging low and heavy, promising a storm that would be unlike any other. For days, Asael had noticed subtle changes in the air, an electric tension that hinted at something great and terrible approaching. The animals, usually shy and scattered throughout the forests and hills, had begun to move in a way that defied their natural instincts. Asael had seen them from a distance, pairs of deer walking calmly through the underbrush, birds flocking together as if guided by an unseen hand, and even the predators, their usual ferocity replaced by an uncharacteristic calm. It was as if the entire animal kingdom had been summoned by a voice only they could hear. One morning, as Asael knelt in prayer near his camp, he was interrupted by a distant, rhythmic rumble. It was not thunder, nor was it the sound of an earthquake, but something deeper, more primal. He stood, heart pounding, and made his way to a higher vantage point overlooking the valley. What he saw filled him with awe. From every direction, animals were converging on the ark. They moved with a sense of purpose and order that was as miraculous as it was eerie. The lions walked beside the lambs, their golden manes ruffling in the growing wind. Elephants, their massive forms moving with deliberate grace, led the way for smaller creatures that scurried along at their feet. Birds of every color and size filled the sky, their wings beating in perfect harmony as they descended toward the ark. The ground trembled with the sheer number of creatures making their way across the landscape, a living tide of fur, feathers, and scales that moved as one. Asael could do nothing but watch, his breath caught in his throat. The procession of animals seemed endless, stretching from the farthest reaches of the valley to the very entrance of the ark. It was as if the entire animal kingdom had been called to this place, each pair answering the summons with a calm that belied the natural order. There was no fear, no confusion, only a serene acceptance of their fate, as if they knew they were being led to safety. As the animals reached the ark, they entered in perfect order. The larger beasts moved slowly and deliberately, while the smaller creatures darted inside with quick, nimble steps. The birds, too, found their places, settling in the rafters and perches that Noah had prepared for them. The predators, whose very nature was to hunt and kill, walked among their prey without so much as a growl or a snarl. It was a sight that defied explanation, a miracle that Asael knew was the work of God alone. The sky darkened further as the last of the animals entered the ark, the clouds thickening and swirling in a way that made Asael's skin prickle with foreboding. He knew that the time was drawing near, that the floodwaters were soon to come. The air was heavy with moisture, the scent of rain growing stronger with each passing moment. Asael retreated to his camp, where he knelt once more in prayer, seeking the guidance and strength he would need for the coming days. As he prayed, Asael felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had been chosen to witness this moment, to be part of God's plan for the renewal of the earth. The enormity of what was about to happen filled him with both awe and dread, but he knew that he was in the hands of the Almighty. The voice that had guided him here now spoke to his soul, a gentle whisper that urged him to be ready. The first drops of rain began to fall, cool and heavy, as Asael opened his eyes. The storm was beginning, and with it, the fulfillment of God's promise. Asael gathered his few belongings and stood at the edge of the camp, watching as the rain intensified, transforming from a light drizzle into a torrential downpour. The wind howled through the valley, bending the trees and churning the water in the river into a frothy, raging torrent. And then, in the midst of the storm, Asael heard the voice of God once more. It was clear and unmistakable, cutting through the roar of the wind and rain. Asael, the voice commanded, "The time has come. Run to the ark and do not delay. You will be spared from the destruction that is about to befall the earth." Without a second thought, Asael took off running. The rain pelted him, drenching him to the bone, but he felt no cold, only the urgency of God's command. The ground was slick with mud, and the wind threatened to knock him off his feet, but Asael pushed forward, driven by a single purpose: to reach the ark before it was too late. As he neared the ark, Asael saw that the great door was still open, a beacon of safety in the midst of the storm. He could barely see through the sheets of rain, but he pressed on, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and faith. He reached the entrance just as the waters began to rise, flooding the valley and sweeping away everything in their path. Asael slipped inside the ark, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The interior was dim, the only light coming from the small openings in the walls. The air was thick with the scent of animals and wet wood, and the sound of the rain pounding on the roof was deafening. But inside, there was also a profound sense of peace, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos raging outside. Asael found a small corner near the back of the ark where he could sit and catch his breath. He was soaked and exhausted, but his heart was filled with gratitude. He had made it. He was safe. The ark, this miraculous vessel, was now his refuge. The ark began to shift as the waters continued to rise, lifting it from the ground and setting it afloat on the growing sea. Asael felt the motion beneath him, the gentle rocking as the ark was carried away from the destruction that was overtaking the earth. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, knowing that he was in the hands of God. For hours, the storm raged on, the wind howling and the rain lashing against the ark with a force that shook its very timbers. Asael could feel the power of the floodwaters as they surged around the ark, swallowing the land and everything on it. The world he had known was gone, swept away in the judgment that God had brought upon the earth. But inside the ark, there was peace, a peace that came from knowing that God had a plan, and that Asael was part of that plan. As the storm began to subside, Asael opened his eyes. The ark was still adrift, but the ferocity of the storm had lessened. The sounds of the animals, once a cacophony of fear and confusion, had quieted, replaced by the low, steady breathing of creatures that had found their place in this new world. Asael took a deep breath and felt a wave of calm wash over him. He had witnessed the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the earth. The world outside had been washed clean, and soon, a new world would emerge, a world where righteousness and faith would be the foundation of life. Asael knew that the journey was far from over, but he was ready to see it through, to witness the fulfillment of God's promise, and to play his part in the creation of a new world. And so, as the ark drifted on the endless sea, Asael settled into his corner, his heart filled with a quiet resolve. He would continue to trust in God, to follow where he led, and to remain faithful to the end. For Asael knew that he had been chosen for a purpose, and that purpose was just beginning to unfold. Part 3. The Great Deluge. As the days turned into weeks, the ark became a world unto itself, floating on the vast, featureless sea that now covered the earth. The constant rocking of the vessel had become a steady rhythm, lulling the animals into a calm stupor and giving Asael a strange sense of serenity amidst the cataclysm. Outside, the waters stretched endlessly, an unbroken expanse of dark waves beneath a sky that was perpetually gray and heavy with clouds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that had been utterly transformed. Asael could no longer see the mountains or the valleys that had once defined the landscape. There were no landmarks, no signs of the life that had existed before the flood, only the endless sea, as far as the eye could see. It was as if the earth had been wiped clean, a blank slate awaiting the hand of God to create anew. Inside the ark, the air was thick with the scent of animals and damp wood. The sounds of the creatures, once a cacophony of fear and confusion, had quieted, replaced by the low murmurs of contentment as they settled into their new surroundings. Asael moved quietly among them, tending to their needs as best he could, though he knew that it was God who truly provided for them. Fruits and grains appeared miraculously each day, just as they had since the journey began, enough to sustain both Asael and the animals without fail. Asael had found a small corner near the back of the ark where he could rest and pray. It was a humble space, surrounded by wooden beams and the gentle sounds of the animals breathing. There, he spent his days in quiet reflection, seeking communion with God and pondering the great mystery of the flood. He marveled at the divine plan that had brought him to this place, at the power of God's judgment and the mercy that had spared him. The days passed in a quiet rhythm. Asael rose with the first light of dawn, though the sun was hidden behind the thick clouds, and he began each day with prayer, giving thanks for the protection and provision that God had granted. He would then tend to the animals, moving among them with a gentle hand, offering food and water where it was needed. Though the task was simple, Asael took it as an act of worship, a way to honor the Creator who had entrusted him with this responsibility. The ark itself was a marvel of design and construction. Asael had never seen anything like it, and as the days passed, he found himself marveling at the skill and foresight of Noah, who had built the vessel to withstand the unimaginable forces of the flood. The interior was spacious, with enough room to accommodate the vast menagerie of animals that had been gathered, and yet it felt intimate, as if every space had been carefully considered and crafted with care. The animals, too, were a source of wonder for Asael. Creatures that would never have coexisted in the wild now lived side by side in peace. Predators slept beside prey, their natural instincts subdued by a divine calm. Asael knew that this, too, was a miracle, a sign of God's presence and protection. He often spent hours watching them, marveling at the diversity of life that had been preserved within the ark. Each species, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, was a testament to the creativity and wisdom of God. But as the days turned into weeks, Asael began to feel the weight of the journey. The endless sea, once a source of awe, now filled him with a deep longing for the earth that had been lost. He missed the feel of solid ground beneath his feet, the scent of the soil, and the sight of trees and mountains. The ark, though a refuge, had become a kind of prison, adrift in a world that had been washed clean by the flood. Asael often found himself staring out of the small windows in the ark, looking for any sign that the waters were receding, that the earth was beginning to emerge from beneath the flood. But day after day, there was nothing, only the same unbroken expanse of water, the same heavy sky. It was as if time itself had stopped, leaving Asael and the animals in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the moment when God would reveal the next step in his plan. In these moments of doubt and longing, Asael turned to prayer. He would kneel in his small corner, his hands clasped in front of him, and pour out his heart to God. He prayed for patience, for the strength to endure the journey, and for the faith to trust in God's timing. He knew that the flood was a necessary judgment, that the world had been corrupted beyond repair, and that this was the only way to cleanse it. But the waiting was hard, and Asael struggled with the loneliness and isolation that came with it. Yet, even in his moments of doubt, Asael never lost sight of the fact that he had been chosen for this journey. He was part of God's plan, a plan that was far greater than anything he could understand. And so he continued to pray, to trust, and to wait. One day, as Asael was deep in prayer, he felt a subtle shift in the ark's movement. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Asael pause. He rose to his feet and made his way to one of the small windows, his heart pounding with anticipation. Outside, the sea was as vast and unbroken as ever, but there was something different in the air, a sense that the waters were beginning to recede, that the earth was slowly re-emerging from beneath the flood. Asael's heart swelled with hope. He knew that the journey was not over, that there were still many days ahead, but this small sign was enough to renew his faith. He returned to his corner and knelt once more in prayer, giving thanks for the hope that had been rekindled in his heart. The days that followed were marked by a quiet anticipation. Asael continued his daily routine, tending to the animals and spending long hours in prayer, but there was a new sense of purpose in his actions. He could feel the world beginning to change, the floodwaters slowly retreating, revealing the new earth that lay beneath. The ark, once a solitary vessel adrift on an endless sea, was now beginning to feel the pull of the land, the promise of a new beginning. Asael knew that there was still much to be done, that the journey was far from over. But he was ready. He had witnessed the destruction of the old world, and now he would witness the birth of the new. The ark, this vessel of salvation, would carry them to a new land, a land where righteousness would reign, and where the covenant of God would be fulfilled. And so, as the ark drifted on the slowly receding waters, Asael prepared himself for what was to come. He would continue to trust in God, to follow where he led, and to play his part in the creation of a new world. For Asael knew that this was his purpose, and he was ready to see it fulfilled. Part 4. The New Beginning. Asael had been aboard the ark for what felt like an eternity, but the day finally came when the ark ceased its gentle rocking. There was a new stillness, a silence that seemed to echo through the great vessel. The constant motion that had become so familiar was replaced by a subtle shift, and Asael knew that the ark had come to rest. The anticipation that had been building within him for days now blossomed into hope. He moved quickly to one of the small windows and peered out, his breath catching in his throat. For the first time since the flood had begun, there was something other than water in his view. The peaks of mountains, their jagged edges piercing through the receding waters, stood as a testament to the land that lay beneath. The earth was beginning to reveal itself, and with it, the promise of a new beginning. Asael's heart swelled with gratitude. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he whispered a prayer of thanks to God. The long journey was finally nearing its end, and soon, he would set foot on solid ground once more. The floodwaters had served their purpose, cleansing the earth of its corruption, and now, God was revealing the new world that had been born from the destruction. The days that followed were filled with both anticipation and preparation. Asael continued to care for the animals, ensuring that they were well fed and healthy, but his mind was consumed with thoughts of what lay ahead. He knew that the time was coming when they would leave the ark and step into a world that had been completely transformed. The first signs of life began to emerge as the waters continued to recede. From the windows of the ark, Asael could see patches of green, young shoots pushing their way through the soil, trees beginning to stretch their branches toward the sky, and flowers blooming in the warm sunlight. The air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and new growth, a stark contrast to the damp, musty smell that had permeated the ark for so long. Asael marveled at the sight. The land was rich and fertile, a blank canvas upon which God would paint a new creation. The mountains that had once towered over the valleys were now softened by a blanket of green, their slopes gentle and inviting. The ground, still damp from the receding floodwaters, was soft and yielding underfoot, ready to bring forth life once more. As the days passed, Asael began to explore the areas of the ark that had been off-limits during the flood. He walked through the vast interior, marveling at the craftsmanship that had gone into its construction. The ark had been a refuge, a place of safety and shelter during the storm, and now it was preparing to fulfill its final purpose, to deliver its passengers safely to the new world that awaited them. The animals, too, sensed the change in the air. They became more restless, their natural instincts reawakening as they prepared to leave the confines of the ark and return to the wild. Asael watched as they moved about their enclosures, their movements more purposeful, their eyes bright with anticipation. It was as if they knew that the time was near, that soon they would be free to roam the earth once more. Finally, the day came when God spoke to Asael, his voice filling the ark with a sense of peace and purpose. "Asael," the voice said, gentle yet commanding, "the time has come. You may leave the ark and see the earth that I have made new." Asael's heart leapt with joy. He moved quickly to the door of the ark, his hands trembling with excitement as he unlatched it and pushed it open. Light flooded the interior, blinding him for a moment as his eyes adjusted to the brightness. He took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air that filled his lungs, and stepped out onto the ramp that led down to the earth below. The sight that greeted him was nothing short of miraculous. The land before him was a paradise, a world reborn from the chaos of the flood. The sky was a brilliant blue, unmarred by the storm clouds that had once darkened it. The sun shone brightly, its warm rays kissing the earth and bringing life to everything it touched. Asael stepped onto the soft, damp ground, his heart filled with awe. The earth felt cool and welcoming beneath his feet, a stark contrast to the hard wooden floors of the ark. He knelt down and ran his fingers through the soil, feeling its richness, its readiness to bring forth new life. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered a prayer of thanks to God. He had been chosen to witness this new beginning, and he would honor that privilege with every fiber of his being. The animals began to emerge from the ark, moving cautiously at first, as if unsure of the world that awaited them. But soon, they found their confidence, and they began to explore the land with a sense of freedom and joy that was palpable. The birds took to the sky, their wings beating against the air as they soared higher and higher, their songs filling the valley with music. The larger animals, too, began to roam, their movements slow and deliberate as they adjusted to their new surroundings. Asael watched them with a sense of wonder. Each creature, from the smallest insect to the largest beast, was a testament to the power and creativity of God. They had been preserved through the flood, and now they would be the foundation of the new world that was taking shape before his eyes. The land itself seemed to breathe with life. Streams of crystal-clear water flowed through the valleys, their banks lined with young trees and vibrant flowers. The air was filled with the scent of blossoms and fresh earth, a heady mixture that made Asael's heart soar. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of new growth, saplings pushing their way through the soil, flowers blooming in a riot of color, and the first shoots of crops that would one day feed the inhabitants of this new world. Asael knew that there was much work to be done. The land was rich and fertile, but it needed to be cultivated, cared for, and nurtured. He would build a home here, a place where he could live in harmony with the earth and with God. He would plant crops, tend to the animals, and teach others to do the same. He would be a steward of this new creation, honoring the covenant that God had made with him. The sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. Asael stood at the edge of the valley, looking out over the land that stretched before him. It was a sight that filled him with hope and peace. The world had been cleansed, and now it was time to begin anew. That evening, as Asael sat by the fire he had built near the entrance of the ark, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this place. It had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been a journey of faith, one that had deepened his trust in God and strengthened his resolve. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face it with courage and determination. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Asael whispered a prayer of thanks. He had witnessed the destruction of the old world, and now he was witnessing the birth of the new. He had been chosen for a purpose, and he would see it through to the end. The journey was far from over, but Asael was ready for whatever lay ahead. The night was calm, the air filled with the sounds of the animals settling into their new home. Asael closed his eyes and let the peace of the moment wash over him. He was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And as he drifted off to sleep, his heart was filled with a deep sense of contentment and purpose. The new world was just beginning, and Asael was ready to play his part in its creation. Part 5. A Life of Faith. Years passed since Asael first stepped out of the ark onto the new, untouched earth. The world that had once been covered in water now flourished with life. The small valley where the ark had come to rest had grown into a thriving community, a place where righteousness and peace reigned, and where the covenant between God and his creation was honored in every aspect of daily life. Asael had played a crucial role in building this community. He had dedicated himself to cultivating the land, planting crops, and caring for the animals that had been preserved in the ark. His hands had tilled the soil, his sweat had watered the fields, and his prayers had guided every decision. The once barren landscape was now rich with vegetation, the fields heavy with grain, and the orchards bursting with fruit. Streams of fresh water flowed through the valley, nourishing the earth and providing for the needs of the people and animals alike. Asael's home, a modest dwelling made from the wood of the surrounding trees, stood on a gentle slope overlooking the valley. From this vantage point, he could see the entire community. Children playing in the fields, families working together to harvest crops, and animals grazing peacefully in the meadows. It was a sight that filled his heart with joy and gratitude every day. The community that had formed around Asael was a reflection of his values and the teachings he had imparted. It was a place where people lived in harmony with one another and with the earth, where they worked together for the common good, and where they honored the covenant that God had made with them. There was no greed, no violence, only a shared commitment to living in righteousness and faith. Asael had become a mentor to the younger members of the community, teaching them the skills they needed to thrive in this new world. He spent his days working alongside them in the fields, sharing stories of the flood and the ark, and reminding them always of the importance of faith and obedience to God. His wisdom and guidance were sought after by all, and he was respected not just for his knowledge, but for the kindness and generosity he showed to everyone he met. One of Asael's favorite places was a small grove of trees that had grown near the spot where the ark had come to rest. The trees, tall and strong, provided shade from the sun and a place of quiet reflection. Asael often came here to pray, to seek God's guidance, and to find peace in the midst of his busy life. It was a place where he felt closest to the Creator, where he could hear his voice most clearly. One day, as Asael sat in the grove, he was joined by a group of children from the community. They were bright-eyed and eager, full of questions about the world around them. Asael welcomed them with a smile, his heart warmed by their presence. "Tell us a story, Asael," one of the children said, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Tell us about the flood and how you came to this place." Asael chuckled softly and motioned for the children to sit around him. "Very well," he said, his voice gentle, but filled with the weight of experience. "But remember, this is not just a story. It is the truth of what happened, the truth of God's judgment and his mercy." The children nodded eagerly, their eyes fixed on Asael as he began to speak. He told them of the world before the flood, of the corruption and wickedness that had spread across the earth, and of the voice of God that had called him to leave his home and embark on a journey of faith. He described the building of the ark, the gathering of the animals, and the moment when the floodwaters began to rise, washing away the old world and leaving only the ark and its inhabitants to survive. Asael spoke of the months spent adrift on the endless sea, of the patience and faith required to endure the long journey, and of the joy and relief he felt when the ark finally came to rest on solid ground. He described the new world that had emerged from the flood, a world cleansed of sin and ready for a fresh start. And he told them of the covenant that God had made with Noah and all of creation, a promise that the earth would never again be destroyed by water. The children listened in rapt attention, their faces filled with wonder and awe. Asael could see that they were beginning to understand the gravity of what had happened, the significance of the events that had shaped their world. He knew that these stories would stay with them, that they would pass them on to future generations, keeping alive the memory of God's judgment and mercy. When Asael finished speaking, there was a moment of silence as the children absorbed what they had heard. Then one of the older boys spoke up. "Asael, what was it like to see the new world for the first time? Were you afraid?" Asael smiled, his eyes twinkling with the memories. It was overwhelming, he said, to see the earth fresh and new, after so long adrift on the sea. It was a sight unlike any other. But I was not afraid. I knew that God had a plan for us, that he had spared us for a reason, and I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that we were part of that plan. The boy nodded thoughtfully, and Asael could see the gears turning in his mind. "I want to be like you, Asael," the boy said, his voice filled with determination. "I want to have faith like yours, to trust in God and do what is right." Asael's heart swelled with pride. "You will be, if you continue to walk in faith," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "God has a plan for each of us, and if we follow his path, we can do great things." The children left the grove soon after, their heads full of dreams and aspirations. Asael watched them go, his heart filled with hope for the future. He knew that the legacy he was leaving behind would continue to grow, nurtured by the love and faith that had guided him throughout his life. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the valley, Asael returned to his home. The night was calm and peaceful, the air filled with the sounds of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Asael sat on the porch of his home, watching as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. The day was ending, but Asael knew that his work was far from over. His life had been a journey of faith. From the moment he heard God's call to the day he stepped off the ark onto the new earth. He had seen the power of God's hand at work, had witnessed the destruction of the old world and the birth of the new. And he had played his part in the creation of this new community, a place where righteousness and peace would flourish for generations to come. Asael closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. He was filled with a deep sense of contentment, knowing that he had lived a life that honored God and fulfilled the purpose for which he had been chosen. He had been a steward of the earth, a mentor to the young, and a beacon of faith in a world that had been reborn. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Asael knew that he was ready for whatever lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that he had done all he could to make the world a better place. The story of the flood, of the ark, and of the new beginning would live on in the hearts of those who had been touched by his life, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the goodness of God. With that thought, Asael drifted off to sleep, his heart filled with peace and his soul ready to return to the God who had guided him every step of the way. The valley was quiet, the night serene, and the legacy of Asael, a man of faith, righteousness, and love, would continue to inspire generations to come. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.